So what if losing a multi-billion-dollar Boeing deal isn't like a failure of negotiation, but actually just a mathematical certainty?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a heavy question to start with.
Right. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a newly published op-ed that just dropped today, May 18th, 2026.
Fresh off the press.
Exactly. It's by Eric Reinhardt, and it's titled Slogans versus Leverage: The Reality of Modern Statecraft.
It's a fantastic piece. Really digs into the mechanics of things.
It does. And our mission today is to, extract the core insights from this piece. The author uses the recent U.S.-China summit to examine the very stark contrast between political branding, so like the loud things leaders say, and actual geopolitical power, which is the quiet things leaders can actually do.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a really critical distinction. Reinhardt uses this summit to basically expose the underlying mechanics of global power.
Taking us beneath the surface level, right?
Exactly. We get past the press conferences and the political rallies, and we start looking at the actual structural math that dictates international relations.
Right. But before we get deep into those mechanics, I do need to put a quick disclaimer out there for you, the listener.
Good call. Always important.
Yeah, because the source material we are working with today contains some pretty politically charged critiques. Reinhardt takes direct aim at Donald Trump and his administration's approach to China, while he's simultaneously analyzing Xi Jinping's strategy.
And we're not here to debate the politics of that.
Exactly. In this deep dive, we are not endorsing these viewpoints, we are not taking political sides, and our goal is strictly impartial.
Right. We're just analyzing the text.
We are just here to unpack the strategic concepts, the economic realities, and the arguments the author presents. We just want to give you the tools to understand this framework of statecraft.
Yeah, we are basically dissecting the architecture of the author's argument. By analyzing how Reinhardt defines the difference between leverage and slogans, we can, extract a lens for understanding how superpowers maneuver.
Regardless of their political ideology.
Exactly. The map doesn't care about your politics.
Okay, let's unpack this. The immediate catalyst for Reinhardt's article is the recent face-to-face summit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping.
Right, the big meeting.
Yeah, and we don't need to rehash the public personas, right? We all know Trump's brand over the last decade has been aggressively built around being the ultimate hardliner on China.
Oh, for sure. The tariffs, the rhetoric, the whole art of the deal persona.
Exactly. But Reinhardt argues that when the actual closed-door meeting happened, that decade-long performance basically collided with a concrete reality.
And reality won.
It really did. Let's look at the actual outcomes, starting with Boeing, because that was huge.
Oh, the Boeing example is probably the most immediate economic metric Reinhardt highlights. Leading up to the summit, there were widespread industry reports indicating Boeing was positioning for aircraft orders from China.
And we're talking big numbers, right?
Huge numbers, in the neighborhood of 500 planes.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that is a massive injection of capital, jobs, and just industrial momentum for the United States.
Right, but then the summit happens.
The summit happens. And following the handshake, the public number that actually emerged plummeted to closer to 200 aircraft.
A drop of 300 planes. I mean, 300 wide-body and narrow-body aircraft isn't just like a minor negotiating concession.
No, it's not a rounding error.
It's not a bad day at the table. That represents billions of dollars and years of manufacturing pipeline just suddenly vanishing.
Vanishing into thin air.
And Reinhardt points out this wasn't the only retreat. He pivots over to Taiwan, which is obviously the most volatile geopolitical flashpoint in the whole relationship.
Yeah, and during the summit, Xi Jinping did not mince words regarding the Taiwan Strait.
He was pretty blunt, wasn't he?
Very blunt. He publicly drew a hard line, issuing a direct warning about clashes and conflicts if the United States mishandled the island's status.
So how did the U.S. respond?
Well, Reinhardt observed that while Trump returned to the U.S. utilizing his standard tough-talking brand, he was notably unwilling to clearly articulate if he would aggressively move forward with actual material arms support for Taiwan.
So the rhetoric remained loud, but the actual policy commitment hesitated.
Exactly.
It's just, it's really compelling how Reinhardt frames this dynamic. It's less like a traditional boxing match where two fighters are trading equal blows,
Right, it's not tit for tat.
Yeah, it's more like two people trying to play a high-stakes game of chess while balancing on the same tightrope.
Oh, I like that visual.
Right. One player is shouting to the crowd, talking about how great his next move will be, while the other player is quietly shifting his weight, subtly vibrating the rope and forcing the loud player to desperately grab onto the board just to keep from falling off.
That's spot on.
The crowd hears the shouting, but the reality is dictated by who actually controls the tension on the rope.
What's fascinating here is how that tightrope analogy maps perfectly onto Reinhardt's core thesis.
How so?
While the summit's disappointing outcomes,
Yeah.
the evaporation of 300 Boeing orders, the hesitation on Taiwanese arms sales, they were not accidents of personality.
Right, it wasn't just a bad mood.
Exactly. They were the inevitable symptoms of a much deeper structural reality. Reinhardt boils this reality down to one single word: leverage.
Leverage.
Yeah, the text explicitly states the real issue is leverage. China has leverage.
Well, let's dig into the actual anatomy of that leverage then, because Reinhardt is very methodical about breaking down what that actually looks like in practice.
He really is. He doesn't just leave it as a buzzword.
No, he starts with financial leverage, specifically noting that China holds hundreds of billions of dollars in United States debt.
Which is a staggering amount of money.
It is. But let's look at the mechanism here. How does holding pieces of paper actually translate into a weapon at a geopolitical summit?
It translates into a weapon through the bond market. I mean, holding hundreds of billions in U.S. Treasury securities means Beijing is basically one of the foundational financiers of the American government's deficit.
Okay, so they fund our debt.
Right. And if Beijing were to abruptly stop buying that debt, or worse, if they began dumping their existing treasuries onto the open market en masse, the supply of those bonds would skyrocket.
And what happens then?
Well, to attract buyers for all those new bonds, the yield or the interest rate on those bonds would have to go up.
Ah, I see. And when Treasury yields go up, everything else in the American economy goes up with it, right?
Precisely the mechanism Reinhardt is pointing toward. That spike in Treasury yields immediately blades into the consumer market.
Like everyday people.
Exactly. Mortgage rates for a family trying to buy a home jump. Credit card interest rates climb.
Oh, wow.
And the cost for American businesses to borrow capital, to expand their operations or hire new workers, it becomes prohibitively expensive.
No, Beijing isn't just holding a financial IOU.
No, not at all.
They are holding a lever that directly controls the borrowing costs of the American middle class. It is literally a silent gun resting on the negotiating table.
That's a great way to put it.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because the financial lever is only one piece of the puzzle, Reinhardt goes even further into the physical materials that run the modern world.
Ah, yes, the rare earth minerals.
Exactly. Critical rare earth minerals. He explicitly links China's dominance over these supply chains to the most vital sectors of the American economy.
We're talking advanced defense systems.
Right. Defense systems, the semiconductors inside literally every computer and smartphone, aerospace manufacturing, and advanced electronics.
Yeah, and the term rare earth minerals can sometimes feel a bit abstract to people.
It sounds like sci-fi.
It does. But Reinhardt's argument demands we look at the industrial reality. This leverage isn't just about having the raw rocks buried in the ground within your borders.
Because we have rocks too, right?
Exactly. The United States, Australia, other nations, they actually have deposits of these minerals. The true leverage, the actual structural choke point China has engineered over decades, is the refining capacity.
Ah. So they own the process of turning the dirt into the actual usable technology.
Exactly. They control over 80 to 90% of the global processing capacity for various rare earth elements.
80 to 90%, that's a monopoly.
It basically is. I mean, you can mine the ore in California, but historically, you have had to ship it all the way to China to be separated and refined.
Just to get the high purity metals.
Right. The metals and magnets required to build a fighter jet, a missile guidance system, or an MRI machine.
Wow.
Building that refining infrastructure takes massive capital, years of permitting, and immense environmental tolerance, which China just systematically absorbed while the West offshored it to save a buck.
So if you are sitting across the table from Xi Jinping and you want to threaten a massive trade escalation, you have to simultaneously grapple with this terrifying reality.
Yeah, it's a huge reality check.
Your adversary controls the spigot for the physical materials required to build the military hardware you would use to project power against them.
And the consumer electronics that keep your domestic economy afloat.
Exactly. It's a double bind.
And that physical reliance flows directly into the third pillar of leverage Reinhardt outlines, which is deep economic dependence and market access.
The market access is huge.
It is. American corporations are inextricably linked to Chinese manufacturing capacity to build their products, but equally important, they are dependent on the vast Chinese consumer market to actually buy those products.
Which brings us right back to the Boeing example.
Exactly.
Boeing doesn't just lose 300 plane orders in a vacuum. The Chinese aviation market is heavily influenced, if not directly controlled, by state directives.
It's all connected.
Right. When Beijing decides to route its infrastructure spending away from an American aerospace company and toward a European competitor like Airbus, or toward their own domestic alternatives, they are using market access as a weaponized tool of statecraft.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, Reinhardt is illustrating why treating this relationship like a simple transactional rivalry is a profound miscalculation.
It's not just a trade deficit.
No, as the author states, the U.S. and China are locked in a state of deep structural dependency. The foundations of their supply chains, their financial systems, their consumer markets, they are woven together at a cellular level.
Okay, wait. I have to jump in here and push back on this framework a bit, or at least how we are interpreting it.
Sure, go for it.
If Reinhardt is describing the U.S. and China as deeply entangled and their economies are woven together at a cellular level, isn't leverage inherently a two-way street?
I mean, yes, absolutely.
Because we just talked about the threat of China dumping U.S. debt. But if they dump our debt, the value of the U.S. dollar plummets.
Right.
That makes American exports cheaper and Chinese imports vastly more expensive, which would absolutely devastate China's own export-driven manufacturing sector.
It'd be a disaster for them.
Right. And furthermore, if American corporations rely on Chinese manufacturing, well, Chinese manufacturing relies entirely on American capital, American consumer demand, and American intellectual property. So doesn't the author's argument imply a mutual vulnerability that makes this whole thing a stalemate?
That's a great point. The mutual vulnerability is absolutely real, and acknowledging it is crucial to understanding the text.
Okay, good.
Because if the U.S. consumer stops buying, Chinese factories go dark, and domestic unrest in China spikes. That's their nightmare.
Right.
But Reinhardt's specific critique is not about the existence of mutual vulnerability. It is about the asymmetrical deployment of leverage within that vulnerability.
Asymmetrical deployment, meaning one side is basically willing to endure more pain or is just better at weaponizing the entanglement.
Yeah, it is entirely about how the entanglement is managed strategically. Reinhardt's argument is that Beijing utilizes its position within that structural web to force tangible, real-world concessions.
Like shrinking the Boeing deal.
Exactly, or enforcing red lines on Taiwanese arms sales.
Yeah.
They use the leverage to extract actual policy. Conversely, Reinhardt argues that the U.S., particularly under Trump's strategy, attempts to manage this incredibly complex, high-stakes structural dependency with surface-level branding and loud rhetoric.
So slogans.
Right. The vulnerability is mutual, but a slogan cannot dismantle a fully integrated global supply chain.
Man, that makes the distinction much clearer. It's the difference between treating a deeply infected wound with a specialized, targeted antibiotic regimen versus just putting a brightly colored bandage over it and loudly declaring that the wound is healed.
That is exactly it.
The underlying biological reality of the infection really doesn't care about the bandage.
No, it doesn't. And that transition brings us to the final major theme of Reinhardt's op-ed. Having established the anatomy of China's multifaceted leverage, the author shifts his focus to the American response.
Right, the branding versus statecraft part.
Yes. He draws a hard, definitive boundary between the concept of branding and the actual execution of statecraft.
And to be fair to the text, Reinhardt doesn't deny Trump's proficiency in the branding department.
Not at all.
The author readily acknowledges that Trump's political superpower is branding dominance. He possesses this undeniable ability to dominate a news cycle, dictate the daily media narrative, and project an image of strength to his domestic political base.
Yeah, but Reinhardt's core warning is that dominating a news cycle is not the same thing as dominating a geopolitical rival.
They're totally different skill sets.
Completely. The author outlines what he believes a legitimate toolkit for strategic competition actually requires, and it is decidedly unglamorous.
Right, it's not going to make the evening news.
No, it requires strict discipline. It requires the painstaking work of building and maintaining robust international alliances to create collective leverage.
Which is hard work.
Very hard. It requires rigorous, centralized industrial policy, long-term economic planning, and heavy, sustained investment in domestic technological development.
He specifically calls for long-term geopolitical clarity, doesn't he?
He does.
Which means having a grand strategy that spans decades, rather than shifting your foreign policy posture based on, like, the applause meter at a rally or the immediate reaction to a press conference.
Yeah, and he directly contrasts this American reliance on performative politics with Xi Jinping's methodology.
How does he describe Xi's approach?
According to Reinhardt, Xi's statecraft relies on immense patience. It focuses relentlessly on capturing the foundational nodes of the global economy.
The structural stuff we talked about.
Right. Controlling the physical supply chains, dominating the manufacturing bases, and securing the shipping lanes.
Very methodical.
And Xi also utilizes strategic ambiguity, keeping adversaries constantly guessing about exact intentions right up until the moment he chooses to draw a definitive red line.
Just as he did regarding Taiwan at the summit.
Exactly.
There is a metaphor Reinhardt uses to describe Xi's approach that really anchors the whole piece.
The bloodstream one.
Yeah. He writes that Xi Jinping does not need to shout strength every 5 minutes because China already sits quietly inside the global economic bloodstream.
This raises an important question, and it is the ultimate test of Reinhardt's thesis.
That's that.
When push comes to shove, can political branding ever overpower reality when confronted with direct, structural geopolitical pressure?
I mean...
The author's conclusion, based on the outcomes of the summit, is a definitive no. When the structural leverage is applied, the slogans basically just evaporate into the air.
So what does this all mean? If we look at this through the lens of modern technology, it is the exact difference between launching a massive multi-million-dollar marketing campaign for a brand new software platform versus actually writing the complex, invisible back-end code that makes the platform function.
I love that analogy.
Thanks. In Reinhardt's view, the U.S. is essentially running the marketing campaign. We are buying up all the billboard space, making grand promises to the user base, hyping up the features, and just dominating the conversation.
A lot of noise.
Exactly, but Beijing is the developer sitting in a windowless room quietly writing the back-end code. They are laying the fiber optic cables, establishing the server farms, writing the algorithms, and securing the data pipelines.
Doing the boring structural work.
Yes. And when launch day comes, or in the context of this op-ed, when the geopolitical summit happens, it absolutely does not matter how viral your marketing campaign was if the app crashes, because the foundational code is weak. Statecraft is the code. Branding is just the billboard.
That analogy captures the author's critique perfectly. The billboard might win the domestic news cycle and get people excited, but the code determines if the system actually operates under load.
Under the pressure of reality.
Exactly. Reinhardt is arguing that Washington has become addicted to the billboard, while Beijing has spent 30 years quietly building the infrastructure that the entire global digital and physical economy runs on.
And the uncomfortable truth that the text forces us to confront is exactly this dynamic. China has leverage. The U.S. administration arrived with slogans.
And the summit was the crucible where those two approaches finally collided.
It really was.
As Reinhardt concludes, despite all the aggressive, chest-thumping rhetoric leading up to the handshake, the actual material outcomes left the American administration looking less like the architects of the art of the deal and more like negotiators discovering in real time that you simply cannot bluff your way through a structural dependency.
Wow. It is a highly sobering assessment of how modern geopolitical mechanics actually operate.
It really strips away the illusion.
It does. Reinhardt strips away the noise, the drama, and the daily outrage of the news cycle, really forcing the reader to examine the cold, unforgiving math of international leverage.
Yeah, it's pure math at the end of the day.
And for you listening right now, this is why spending the time to understand the architecture of this op-ed is so incredibly valuable.
Absolutely.
By internalizing Reinhardt's stark distinction between slogans and leverage, you are equipping yourself with a really powerful analytical lens.
A filter for the news.
Exactly. The next time you are watching the news cycle churn, the next time you hear any politician from any party standing at a podium making grand, sweeping promises about winning trade wars or dominating foreign adversaries, you can look right past the sound bites.
You can see the code.
Right. You can ask yourself the structural questions. Is this just a billboard, or is there actual back-end code being written here?
Where's the leverage?
Exactly. Where does the true underlying power lie in this situation? Who actually holds the debt? Who actually refines the minerals? Who physically controls the supply chain choke points?
Because that's what matters.
Because as Reinhardt makes incredibly clear, that is where the real story is being written, not on the billboard.
That is the ultimate practical application of this text. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, building entirely on Reinhardt's most striking metaphor.
Let's hear it.
Well, the author notes that China is already inside the global economic bloodstream. Think about what that actually means in a biological sense. If two massive superpowers are truly this economically, financially, and technologically entangled, literally sharing the same circulatory system to keep their economies alive, is it even structurally possible for one nation to aggressively extract itself without causing massive systemic organ failure to its own body?
Oh, wow.
It is a question of immense consequence, and it's something to think deeply about the next time you hear anyone suggest that untangling a globalized world will be quick, painless, or easily won.